A woman from Shobnall in Burton-on-Trent watched the Titanic sink before her eyes. Babies were being thrown into lifeboats. Men were jumping into the freezing sea as the great ship slowly vanished into the darkness. Her name was Mrs. J. Gould, a first-class stewardess aboard the legendary liner RMS Titanic. She lived near the canal side in Shobnall, Burton-on-Trent, and her sister Mrs. Windmill lived at 108 Calais Road in Burton. When Titanic struck an iceberg on the night of April 14, 1912, Mrs. Gould was asleep in her cabin. She was suddenly awakened by the violent shock of the collision. At first, many passengers did not realize what had happened, believing it was only a minor accident. But Mrs. Gould quickly noticed something was wrong. As a stewardess, it was her duty to wake passengers and help them onto the deck. She rushed through the corridors, knocking on cabin doors and urging people to get dressed. Some passengers were so ill with seasickness they were difficult to wake, and precious time was lost trying to convince them that something was terribly wrong. Soon, the lifeboats were being lowered. The order was strict: women and children first. Mrs. Gould later said the greatest difficulty during the evacuation was with the babies. In the confusion, mothers were throwing their babies down into the lifeboats to save them. One tiny baby, only about 6 months old, landed directly in Mrs. Gould's lap. She wrapped the child in clothing and cared for it throughout the freezing night. The boat was crowded and the cold was dreadful. One man later died from exposure. Another terrified passenger hid beneath one of the benches, crying and counting his money while trying to keep warm. From the lifeboat, Mrs. Gould watched the final moments of Titanic. She saw steam pipes bursting as the ship began to fail. Then came what she described as a terrible explosion, and the great liner began to break apart. She saw the enormous hull rise before plunging beneath the freezing sea. Men could be seen jumping from the ship into the dark water below. Across the ocean, the survivors could hear the cries of those struggling in the icy Atlantic. For a moment, the lights of Titanic's bridge were still visible across the water. Then one by one they disappeared. But the disaster did not only affect Burton through survivors. Among those who never returned was George Henry Hinckley, a steward from nearby Derby. He was 39 years old and from a well-known farming family from Radbourne. Only days before the voyage, he wrote to his sister describing the new liner, saying Titanic seemed a great deal better than the Olympic. George Hinckley never returned from the voyage. More than a century later, the story of Titanic still fascinates the world, but through the stories of Mrs. Gould of Shobnall and George Hinckley. The disaster also forms part of the history of Burton-on-Trent and Derbyshire.